Hey, folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. Joining us today are Mr. Paul Friedland and Mr. Robert Hornick, here to discuss their collaborative work titled Citizen of the Shadows, The Lives and Lies of Lothar Witzke. Paul Friedland is an international lawyer and arbitration practitioner. He is the author of numerous works on international law. This is his first published work of history, and he is now writing a second history book. Robert Hornick is a retired international lawyer and part-time professor of practice at University of Arizona Law. He is the author of The Girls and Boys of Belchertown, A Social History of the Belchertown State School for the Feeble-Minded, and What Remains, Searching for the Memory and Lost Grave of John Paul Jones. Okay, so if you've heard of Lothar Witzke before, it's because Citizen of the Shadows is not the first book on him. Coming up on a couple of years ago now, we had author Bill Mills come on to discuss his book on the infamous German spy, Agent of the Iron Cross. So, old Lothar is getting his historical due a century later, it seems. And now, let's talk about this book. So from the University of Tennessee Press website, here's a description of this incredibly well-researched and well-written book. So, quote, one of the most notorious German spies of the 20th century, Lothar Witzke lived a life that reads like a thriller. Convicted of espionage in 1918, he was the only German spy sentenced to death by the United States during World War I. After the war, he was pardoned by President Calvin Coolidge, only to be later accused of responsibility for one of the most spectacular acts of sabotage in U.S. history, the Black Tom munitions depot explosion. After being repatriated to Germany, Witzke lived in Latin America and China as a German expat and later joined the Nazi Party. He ran espionage squads in Great Britain during World War II and became a prominent businessman in Hamburg after the war. He was killed in Hamburg in 1962, possibly by an East German agent as payback for suspected double agent work on behalf of the British. With Citizen of the Shadows, the first full biography of Witzke, Paul Friedland and Robert Hornick trace Witzke's morally complicated life and show readers how an infamous spy thrived in the interwar years and after. They probe his trial, conviction, and pardon, and analyze whether Witzke was really involved in the Black Tom explosion. In doing so, the authors uncover that many of the details of Witzke's life, long assumed to be true, were lies, end quote. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast this evening.
Pleasure to be here.
We're going to dive into the question in just a moment. I just want to say that I was looking forward to reading Citizen of the Shadows. When I did sit down and start to read it, like within, I have to say, like within the first few pages, I was hooked, and I thought I knew his story from the previous book, but you gentlemen go much deeper, and it was what a journey. Like the so well researched and compellingly written. Like I looked forward to getting back to it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, both of you gentlemen are lawyers by training and profession. Have you always had an interest in history?
Well, speaking for myself, I majored in English and American literature, not history, but I have always enjoyed reading history. Since retiring from law practice 20 years ago, I have researched several history topics, and as you mentioned earlier, written 2 other history books in addition to the Witzke book. So, yes, I have always had an interest in history.
For me, being a professor of history is the career that I might have pursued and didn't pursue. I've always felt that I had a few history books in me. It took me longer than it did Robert to find a topic that worked for me, but now I'm fully launched. As you mentioned, now with this project done, I've got a second history book under the way.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. Now this part's really interesting is what inspired you to write a book about Lothar Witzke? Because this is a bit of a, I don't know if a circuitous route is the right right way to say it.
So Robert and I written a bunch of international law briefs together, and we always wanted to collaborate on a history book. Several years ago, exploring ideas, we had the tentative idea to write about presidential pardons. And we literally Googled strange presidential pardons. And there was a long and mostly very uninteresting list of corrupt politicians, corrupt businessmen. But standing out in this list was German spy, Lothar Witzke. And we had immediate questions. Who was he? What did he do? How was he captured? Why was he pardoned? And the more we learned, the more we were fascinated. We came quickly to realize that there was no full-length biography of the man. And we also came to see that much of the evidence of his life was gathered in the form of exhibits and transcripts in an interstate arbitration between the US and Germany in the 1920s and 1930s. And that meant that our particular expertise, not just as international lawyers, but as international arbitration specialists, mattered a lot. So the project has been very satisfying to both of us.
That's fantastic. Robert, anything, sir?
No, that covered the territory.
So I think we're already getting an idea. My next question here was like, how did you approach the research and the writing of Citizen of the Shadows, and what part of his story interested you the most? Did it wind up being the pardon, or is that just a small part of his story?
I'll go first here. Paul and I were colleagues in the same law firm for many years, and we worked together. So we learned how to cooperate in research and writing law-related material. We had, for this project, complementary rather than competing interests in the various phases of Witzke's life. So it was easy for us to divide up the research, at least the initial research, and writing it up. We also discussed what we were doing with each other daily, sometimes multiple times daily. And when there was something to be written, we read and heavily marked up each other's writing. It turned out there was a lot of original source material here in the United States, particularly at the National Archives, and more particularly the archives in College Park, Maryland. So we spent a fair amount of time there doing research. And we found many personal letters that Witzke had written or that had been written to him in his younger years. For German research, we put together a team of researchers in Germany, and they did research on specific questions that we put to them. As for Witzke's story, I was most interested in his life as a World War I spy, including whether he actually did what he was suspected of doing, how he was captured, tried, and convicted, his life as an American prisoner. I was also interested in his early years as a sailor and how, if at all, that experience shaped his life afterwards.
For me, there were two aspects of his story that were of greatest interest. One was the chance to tell the story and the need to tell the story of aspects of America during the World War I era that are rarely reported. The amazing openness of American society that enabled an undercover German spy to cross the continent numerous times and visit wherever he wanted. The quaintness of the US-Mexico border, where one could go from Mexico to the United States by crossing a sleepy street in Nogales.
Yes.
The surprise that a US president, Woodrow Wilson here, gave personal attention to whether the military tribunal that convicted Witzke actually had proper jurisdiction. The creation of Leavenworth and the conditions at Leavenworth in the World War I era and thereafter. All these are we had to go into in depth to tell Witzke's story, and they were all fascinating to me. That's one set. The other was that Witzke's life was representative of 20th century Germany. Witzke is one of those Germans who thrived in Wilhelmine Germany, in Weimar Germany, even though he detested Weimar, in Nazi Germany, and in West Germany. So to tell Witzke's story is to tell the story of 20th century Germany from a particularly interesting and adventurous vantage.
It really is. Yeah, he really does encapsulate. So he lived under four German regimes, with a fifth then neighboring him, the GDR. Yeah,
and he thrived in every one.
Yeah, yeah, he's quite the character, which is perfect because it leads to our next question here. Like, what do you make of Lothar Witzke's early years and his eventual entry into the world of World War I, espionage, and sabotage?
I'll take that one. Your question raises the further question of what did Witzke do in his early years before he became a spy. Based on his correspondence, it would suggest that he had been a merchant sailor on a merchant ship that sailed from Germany to Mexico, Australia, and Chile in 1913 and 14. And he was then stranded by World War I in Valparaiso until 1916, when he jumped ship and headed for San Francisco. However, he told a different story to his captors when he was captured in the United States. He told them that he had been a naval officer on the German warship Dresden that was sunk off the coast of Chile in 1915. And historians who have looked at Witzke's life have tended to believe the Dresden story. I think Paul and I took much satisfaction in establishing beyond a reasonable doubt that the Dresden story was a lie. Witzke went to the U.S. hoping he could find his way back to Germany, but instead he was recruited by one of the local Germans he had met to become a spy and saboteur. And his initial assignments exploited his expertise as a former sailor. For example, he monitored ships and cargoes leaving major West Coast ports for America's European allies.
I just want to say, just really quick, just about Lothar's supposed service in the German Navy. So if unless it's been changed, but I did check it, I think last week. Wikipedia, short article on Lothar Witzke labels him as a German naval officer. And I was like, so after reading your book, I was like, well, this is just a wonderful opportunity for me to use during my day job of I'm a high school teacher. So I was like, well, this is why you can't trust Wikipedia, so they've got him listed as a German naval lieutenant, and that is nowhere near being true. So there.
And not only Wikipedia, it's most of what you read about him.
Yeah.
For our book.
Yeah, incredible. So definitely, it's amazing how that has almost become the accepted, or it has become the accepted truth, right? Incredible.
But hopefully our book will change that.
Yeah, same. And yeah, well, I'm gonna wait a little bit because I have a question about Lothar. We're going a little deeper. But now, one big thing, one part of World War I espionage, sabotage, is the name that was new to me when I started reading about Lothar Witzke, and that is Black Tom. could we talk about what was Black Tom and what happened there? Just facts or
Right.
basic story.
For the first 3 years of World War I, the U.S. was in neutral. But American munitions companies were making a lot of money selling munitions to Britain, France, and Russia, Germany's enemies. To try to do something about this, the German government organized a network of undercover agents in the United States during the period of the U.S. neutrality. And one of their missions was to try to interdict the flow of munitions across the Atlantic. All of the munitions manufactured in the United States were shipped by train across the continent to a railway terminus on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River near the Statue of Liberty called Black Tom, named after a former slave who owned property there.
Okay.
And the munitions were stored at Black Tom until they could be loaded in outbound ships to go across the Atlantic. The network of undercover German agents naturally took note of Black Tom and decided to detonate it. And they did that on the night of July 30, 1916. And the explosion shattered all the windows from the Bowery to Midtown of Manhattan. The reverberations were felt as far away as Philadelphia. The torch of the Statue of Liberty was damaged. This was naturally front page news, and it remains the most spectacular act of sabotage in U.S. history, notwithstanding that it's completely unknown today.
Yes.
And the event was rather traumatizing to especially the New Yorkers who lived through that. And one of the New Yorkers who did was Franklin Roosevelt. And 25 years later, during Roosevelt's third term, after Pearl Harbor, his administration infamously decided to intern for the duration of the war all the Japanese Americans on the West Coast without due process and without evidence against them.
Mm-hmm.
And to try to justify the unjustifiable, Roosevelt commented to his Assistant Secretary of War, "We don't want any more Black Toms." So Black Tom was very much in the minds of two generations of Americans, notwithstanding that it's unknown today. The Americans, in the wake of the Black Tom explosion, actually investigated who was responsible. And they came over time to conclude that two German agents had rowed from the Manhattan side of the Hudson River to the New Jersey side and had detonated the railway terminus. And the man rowing the boat, the Americans came to conclude, was the young and handsome adventurer Lothar Witzke.
All right. I mean, folks, for folks who haven't read the book, or he's right on the cover. Lothar Witzke. Say what you will, he was a good-looking dude. Like he had it going on there.
Yeah, we'll come back to mention how that played in his life.
Yes. Okay, so we have Black Tom. Okay, we're just gonna put that on pause here for a second. You mentioned this earlier, and now we'll give it a name. So, what was the function of the Mixed Claims Commission, and how was it a part of Witzke's life?
Right, I'll take a shot at this. In 1923, the U.S. and Germany entered into what was known as the Treaty of Berlin. The Treaty of Berlin formally ended the state of war between the two nations, and it also set up what was called a Mixed Claims Commission or Arbitration Commission to arbitrate claims by U.S. companies that they had suffered losses during the period of neutrality, U.S. neutrality, by German agents. And the Black Tom sabotage came to dominate that arbitration. It took 16 years to resolve the Black Tom sabotage claim from 1923 to 1939. Germany vehemently denied responsibility for any sabotage, including Black Tom. And there were reasons for that. Several of the German diplomats who had been in the U.S. during World War I, who had had an indirect role in not in Black Tom necessarily, but in organizing the network of undercover agents, would have felt or found it politically embarrassing that they would be implicated at all. So that led Germany vehemently to deny responsibility. And also, it was a more fundamental point. It was so toxic for Germans to be assigned any blame for anything that happened in World War I after the Treaty of Versailles had very notoriously and controversially assigned them war guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So Germany engaged Lothar Witzke to be its star witness. Witzke testified several times in writing that he had nothing to do with Black Tom, that he was in San Francisco at the time. And his testimony was a sidelight in Witzke's life of incessant adventure. But it was very fortunate for us because his role as star witness caused the Americans and Germans to assemble and submit in the arbitration voluminous documents pertaining to Witzke's life. And that remains a huge source of evidence for us in our book.
I was going to ask, like, just to follow up, like, is the mixed claims commission, is this is probably like one of the greater sources of information about Witzke and his adventures here.
Right.
Incredible. So again, your analytical, detailed approach to Witzke's story is impressive, especially so in the final chapters where you work to determine whether Witzke was involved in the Mare Island explosion, the Preparedness Day bombing, and the Black Tom terminal explosion. Can you tell us broadly how you worked out the case for Witzke and Mare Island?
I'll take that one. And let me begin with some background. Mare Island was a U.S. naval station located north of San Francisco. And a U.S. agent by the name of Paul Altendorf claimed that Witzke had confessed to him that he had set off a bomb at Mare Island in July of 1917 that killed, I think it was 6 persons, injured something like 38, and destroyed over 100,000 pounds of gunpowder. There was an official investigation following the bombing, but no suspect was named in the conclusions of that investigation. Witzke's name was unknown at the time. Some months later, Kurt Janke, who was the head of German espionage on the West Coast and who was Witzke's boss, became a suspect. We established that Janke was in Mexico at the time of the Mare Island explosion. So he couldn't have been involved except indirectly. But Witzke was likely in San Francisco at the time. In 1918, I think it was, after Witzke was captured, the authorities tried unsuccessfully to link Witzke to the Mare Island bombing. And we tried to do so as well. We concluded that Witzke did indeed boast to Altendorf that he did the Mare Island bombing, just as Altendorf had claimed. However, we concluded that the evidence for and against Witzke's involvement was insufficient to prove one way or the other.
Incredible. So this brings to the question I wanted to ask earlier. So as you go deeper into Lothar Witzke's story, he comes across as either a really sinister spy or an incredibly gifted liar, or both. With perhaps a heavy dash of, I'm not sure if megalomania is the right word to throw in there. What's your impression of him? Because this whole thing where he's, he said, I was a naval officer on the Dresden. Well, isn't it perfect that he started saying that like after the Dresden had sunk, and nobody, presumably there's not too many people around that can either say that's true or not true. Like he comes across as, to me, as like a smooth liar, like fast, like he can, kind of put a story together and be like, oh yes, this is where I've been. What do you gentlemen think?
Maybe I'll start here. Let me try to respond by giving an assessment of his character that goes a little bit beyond the question of his lying or not, which we address a lot in the book. We think his character changed over the course of his life. From his youthful correspondence to his parents, we see a teenager and a young man full of wonder about the world, wide-eyed wonder. He writes about seeing his first jukebox in Bremen when he first leaves home. He writes about seeing his first traffic jam. And there's an innocence and an absolute patriotism that comes through in the correspondence. And he had the tools to make it in life. He had physical bravery. He stood up to bullies on his merchant marine ship. He was highly intelligent with an amazing ability to learn language. At his trial in 1918, where he was convicted of espionage and sentenced to be hanged, he defended himself, and the transcript shows fluent English speaking by him throughout the trial, even though he had been in an English-speaking world for 1 year and had no education in English. He also learned Spanish fluently. He was also good-looking. And as we learn, and we might get to later, he loved women and women loved him throughout his whole life. He almost always had one or at least one woman involved with him. And he was an idealist as a young man, but his youthful idealism hardened over the course of his life into cynicism and self-interest. He was betrayed by this double agent, Paul Altendorf, who Robert mentioned. He was convicted to be hanged. That can have an effect on someone. He spent 5 years at Leavenworth, and then he went back to Germany at a time of hyperinflation, an experience that traumatized a generation of Germans and left them cynical about what government can and cannot do for them. And in the 1930s, when he was in his 30s, he lived in a series of expat German communities. By then, we don't hear much about idealism. It's about making money, and it's about how he can advance his life. During World War II, his cynicism deepened. It's about money making. It's about young women. There's no hint of attachment to a larger cause. During the 1950s, like many Germans, he made money during the economic miracle. And like a lot of Germans, he felt he had nothing to apologize about. He disdained introspection. He had a favorite daughter named Helga. And in the late 1950s, he was walking with her in Hamburg. And they decided to visit a church, not to pray, but to look at the art. And in the church, they saw a priest kneeling in prayer. And Witzke commented contemptuously to his daughter, "A man bends his knee to no one." Witzke had learned over the course of his life that self-reliance was all.
Yeah.
He could, whether it was lying or not, that's what he had to do, and that's what he did. And it worked for him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Circumstances help dictate a lot. You mentioned contacting descendants of Lothar. I believe Helga had passed away by the time you were working on the book, so you got in touch with grandchildren. How helpful were they in writing the story?
Right, I'll try this one. There are stories that we got from the grandchildren about Lothar Witzke that told us as much, if not more, about the man than all of his youthful adventures together. I just gave one example, the story of him visiting the church. It's from his grandchildren that we know, for example, that Witzke was a womanizer. And his womanizing likely played a role in the day of his death because it was probably a honey trap, an East German female agent that killed him in bed. The other major Witzke family event was the wedding of his favorite child, Helga, in the late 1950s. It was a gala affair in Hamburg. And one of the guests was a beautiful young woman. And in the middle of the wedding reception, Witzke, in the view of all the guests, got down on his knees and declared his love for this beautiful young woman. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't making a joke. He was trying to get her. And his daughter blamed it on the woman for flirting with him. She adored her father, and she, in turn, meanwhile, was marrying another womanizer. So this is an example of the stories that we got from his grandchildren that made the book, made our portrait of Witzke much more complete than it otherwise ever could have been.
Yeah, incredible. Wow. Well, we've got our final question here, and so one of the big questions lingering to this day about Witzke is him and the Black Tom rail terminus explosion of July 1960. Did he do it or not?
I'll take that question. The consensus of earlier historians is that Witzke did it, that he was the one in the rowboat that Paul mentioned earlier that was on the Hudson, and it was he who detonated the bomb that blew up the terminus. For most of the time that we were writing this book, we accepted the consensus, and Paul and I wrote most of the book assuming that Witzke was responsible. But the more we examined the evidence that we were uncovering as we wrote, the less sure we were that the consensus was correct, and the more we came to doubt that consensus. The core evidence that mattered was evidence about where Witzke was at the time of Black Tom. And in the end, there was no credible evidence that he was in the New York area at the time, whereas there was credible evidence that he was in San Francisco. It's possible that the San Francisco evidence was fabricated, and we addressed that in the book as a possibility. But we concluded that it probably was not. Our chapter that deals with the question is divided roughly into two parts, with one part being a brief arguing one way and the other part being a brief arguing the other way. And we allow the reader to reach his or her own conclusion on the subject, but we also present our conclusion. Bottom line, it's not an airtight argument either way, but we concluded that he didn't do it.
Paul, any additional thoughts, sir?
Nope, that gets right to it.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. The book, folks, is Citizen of the Shadows, The Lives and Lies of Lothar Witzke. Seriously, it is very well written. It is a compelling read. And Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time to explain a little bit more about Lothar. Like, I was kind of looking at him as like, wow, like what I was more focusing on just the fact that he lied, but you have painted a much broader and fuller picture of like, hey, this guy just did what he had to do, at least according to his rules. So incredible. You folks, you will not be disappointed in this book. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.